Okay, good afternoon. What I'd like to do today is look at the Ten Commandments. Yaseres Adibros, very meaningful. You can't go wrong by studying that again, 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 again. What I'd like to do very simply is start with the commandment of Shabbos and just look at what Rashi says. After we look at what Rashi says, we'll look at some of the classic midrashim on that, and then we'll look at Rabbi Soloveitchik's powerful writings about the Ten Commandments as well. So, of course, feel free to interrupt me as you see fit. So let us go to the Aseres Hadibros. And we're going to start with the fourth commandment, and we're going to look at Rashi's interpretation. I found the Rashi, every time I look at these Rashis, I see new explanations, new concepts. So it's Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Says the Pasuk, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. Remember the Shabbos to make it holy. Before we look at the Rashi, we'll read all the psukim on Aseres Hadibros. Sheish is yamim ta'avod. 6 days you shall work. V'asisa kol ma'altecha. You have to do all your work. V'yom hashvi Shabbos l'Hashem elkecha. And the seventh day is Shabbos for Hashem. Lo ta'aseh kol ma'acha. On the seventh day you can't do any work. Ata, you, v'emcha, v'techa, your son, your daughter. Avdecha, v'amasla, v'amtecha, v'gerecha, asher b'serecha. Everybody in your household, your servants, your maids, your animals, and the stranger that's in your gates. For 6 days Hashem made the heaven and the earth, the sea, God rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Hashem blessed the Shabbos and made it holy. This is the commandment of Shabbos. I think we could all agree that the Shabbos is one of the central pillars of our faith, and we need to understand Shabbos as well as we can. Anybody who's observed the Shabbos knows just the incredible feeling that we get about the Shabbos. But let's try and study it and understand it in even greater depth. Says the Rashi, remember the Shabbos. But of course, we know that when the Ten Commandments appear in the book of Devarim, it doesn't say Zachor as Yom Shabbos, it says Shamor. Zachor means remember, Shamor means to guard or protect. So Rashi says, Zachor v'Shamor, quoting the Gemara, Rashi says, Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad nemru. Zachor and Shamor were said and at the exact same time. Meaning when God spoke, the words Zachor and Shamor were sounded at the exact same time. And now Rashi goes on to give other examples of verses that were sounded at the exact same time. But see if you can think of a difference between remember the Shabbos and guard the Shabbos being sounded at the exact same time and these other commandments. So too, it states in chapter 31, verse 14. It says in chapter 31, verse 14. Hold on. The repetition of the commandment of the Shabbos. It says, Mechala mos yumas. Says those who desecrate the Shabbos will be put to death. And it also states, Uviyoma Shabbos shnei kivasim. And the Shabbos you shall bring 2 lambs. So these are also reflecting two verses which were said at the same time. Meaning to say that these reflect 2 aspects of the Shabbos. Zachor means remember the Shabbos. Shamar means to guard the Shabbos. So that was said at the same time. So too, do not desecrate the Shabbos. And also a positive commandment. Bring 2 lambs on the Shabbos morning. So too, v'kein lo tilbash shatnes, do not wear wool and linen, was said at the same time as gedilim ta'aseh lach. You have to make yourself fringes, and those fringes can be made from wool and linen. So too, ervas eishes achicha. You're not allowed to ever marry your brother's wife. And at the same time, yivama yavo aleha. And if your brother dies and his widow he has no children, then the other brother must do yibum, marry the widow. These verses were also said at the same time. Hushanamar, this is what it means. Achas tiber Elokim, shtayim zu shamati. So what Rashi says is, this is what it means when it says in the verse in Psalms, God said one, but two is what I heard. And meaning to say that these commandments were said at the same time, and they reflect the fact that the commandments of the Jewish people, many of them, there's two powerful aspects here. First of all, one powerful aspect here is that for many of the commandments have both a positive and a negative implication. That you have to just take Shabbos as the most easy to understand. There are two aspects of the Shabbos: the things we're not allowed to do, and the things we have to do in order to observe the Shabbos properly. So that's certainly one aspect of what we're saying here. That there's two aspects here. There's the things we're not allowed to do and the things we have to do. Like on Shabbos, where we're not allowed to cook, for example, on the Shabbos, but what we also have to do is sanctify the day, make it holy. Don't make it a day like any other day. Don't make it just a day where we don't appreciate the holiness of the day. Make it a day filled with spirituality. But there's another aspect to God saying two things at the same time, and that's contained in the fact that these examples that Rashi gives are opposites. And the Gemara tells us that everything that is prohibited, God created something opposite that's permitted. Meaning to say that there's nothing that's completely prohibited in this world, and there's nothing that's completely permitted, because God made a way for everything to have some aspect of it that was permitted. And so meaning to say that everything in this world, there's a way to do it in a way that's meaningful and beautiful, and there's also a way to do that same concept in a way that's offensive, repugnant, abominable. So that's the idea that's contained within this Shabbos, and that's the idea that's contained within these examples, and that's the idea that's contained within the Torah. Then Rashi says, what does it mean, remember the Shabbos? Rashi says, Tenu was scored tamidis Yom HaShabbos. Always remember the day of the Shabbos. That if for some reason you come across a beautiful object, save it for the Shabbos. Okay, then we'll just say two more Rashis, and you should do all your work. This is a very powerful Rashi. What does it mean? 6 days you shall work and do all your work. Rashi says, Kishetavo Shabbos, when Shabbos comes, it should be in your eyes as though it's completed. Shelo teharer achar malacha. You can't even think about your work on Shabbos. Meaning to say, Shabbos, we are commanded also in our thoughts. And we're not even allowed to think about those things which will distract us and detract from the Shabbos. So we're not even allowed to think about our net worth, our stock market, our business, anything other than the Shabbos, we're not allowed to think about. Meaning to say, we're not allowed to think about weekly activities. We're not allowed to engage in that type of thought. So the Shabbos is about the thought as well. That's what Rashi says. Shelo teharer achar malacha. Then the next Rashi says, what does it mean? You and your sons and your daughters. What kind of sons and daughters is this referring to who are prohibited to work on Shabbos? If it's your adult sons and daughters, Rashi says it can't be that that's the case, because you're not commanded about your adult sons and daughters. They have them. They are commanded on their own that they have to keep the Shabbos. So it's commanded about even your minor sons and daughters, that you're not allowed, even though minors are not commanded to obey the commandments yet. But here we're being told, that The verse is coming to tell us that the adults have to make sure that the minors do not work on the Shabbos. So for this case, if a minor, Rashi says, comes to extinguish a fire on Shabbos, ain't shomin lo. We don't listen to him because it's his responsibility. It's your responsibility to make sure that the child understands that it's Shabbos. Okay, this is the commentary of Rashi that I wanted to start with to frame our discussion at the very beginning. So I'll just pause for a moment. If anybody has any questions, raise your hand. If not, we go on. Okay. See, nobody is raising their hand about the Shabbos. Oh, yeah. Hold on 1 second. Just 1 second. Now let's go to this beautiful, the beautiful midrashim on this, on remember the Shabbos to keep it holy. Again, I'm citing the midrashim that I brought down in this beautiful sefer that I found in Rabbi Ben Mintz's library by Rabbi Yechiel Michal Stern, and it's as follows: Zachor es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. Remember the Shabbos to keep it holy. So I wanted to discuss this topic, this concept, because I've always been very intrigued by this concept. Says the Midrash Tanchuma. Atamot say Yudches mispalin b'chol yom. Every day we recite the Amida. The Amida has 18 blessings, really 19, but okay, they call it the Yudches. The 18 blessings called the Amida. But all of them, it's not the case that all of them talk about the praise of God. Which of the blessings talk about the praise of God? The first 3 and the last 3. And the middle 12 blessings, all of them talk about the needs of man. So when we come to the Amida, the first 3 and the last 3 talk about the praise of God. The middle 12 talk about the needs of man. Lefikach ein mitpalin b'Shabbos shmonasrei. Therefore, on Shabbos, we don't recite the 18 blessings of the Amida. Why not? Because if there be somebody sick inside your household, then you would have mentioned his name in the prayer of the healing. And that will cause him distress. And that will cause him distress. Now, the Shabbos was given to the Jewish people for holiness. HaShabbos nasno Yisro l'kedusha, for holiness, la'oneg, for delight, la'menucha, for comfort, lo l'tzar, not for pain. So we're not supposed to say the prayer of Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, the Amida, because that will cause us distress on Shabbos. Therefore, on Shabbos, what do? We pray the 3 blessings at the beginning of the Amida, the 3 blessings at the end, and just menucha. We talk about the Shabbos in the middle blessing. Therefore, David said, 7 on this day did I praise you. This refers to the 7 blessings, shemispalin b'Shabbos. And what is that? This is the special day for rest, that there's nothing like it. As it says, remember the Shabbos, keep it holy for everything, even from those things that your heart desires and that you want to speak about. Meaning to say, and I'll get to the question one moment, the Midrash is saying, and we'll see the commentary of Rav Stern in a second, Midrash is saying that on Shabbos, we're not allowed to bring pain and distress. Therefore, we don't talk about the needs of man on Shabbos. We only talk about praise of God and the concept of Shabbos, of the rest on Shabbos. Now, it's very hard because Shabbos is the time where we're supposed to, where we really have the most time to spend the most time on our Amidah, to spend the most time on our prayers, because it's a day of rest. But it's important to remember this concept. Hold on, and okay. So looking at Rav Stern's commentary on this prohibition of, or this concept that one's not supposed to pray for your personal needs on Shabbos. So he says the prayers for one's own needs on Shabbos is prohibited. Asura, it's prohibited, as explained in the Yerushalmi, and he quotes the Jerusalem Talmud and in the Midrash. And the reason why you're not allowed to pray for your personal needs is because that might cause you distress when you remember all the things that you're lacking. Because the Shabbos was given to the Jewish people for holiness, for delight, for rest, and not for distress. So from the Talmud, it's clear that the reason is because it's going to cause you anxiety or discomfort, and the rabbis did not want to take away from the honor of the Shabbos. You know what it's like? I guess maybe it's like you go to a wedding, and at the wedding, everybody's dancing, and you're talking about your problems. You're ruining the wedding. You're ruining the wedding by talking about your problems at the wedding. Just talk about the bride and the groom and be happy for them. So that's what it is. On Shabbos, don't ruin the mood. Don't ruin the mood. That's the concept. And so therefore, that Talmud and Brachot says that really on Shabbos, a person should recite the whole 18 blessings. And so therefore, if you started on Shabbos and you accidentally were saying the weekday prayers, you don't have to stop in the middle of the blessing. But the rabbis didn't want to disturb the honor of Shabbos, and that's why we don't do it. So now Rav Stern discusses under what circumstances can you pray for your personal needs on Shabbos. So he says, in the Jerusalem Talmud, he says that we can draw a distinction. He says we can draw a distinction between a request that causes one to cry. Like if you're making a request, let's say a person is praying for something from the depths of their heart, and as a result of this request, if they start formulating this request, they're going to actually start crying. That's going to be prohibited. And that, it's something that causes you to have this type of pain and to be so acute with it. That type of request from God will be prohibited on Shabbos. But a prayer that a person doesn't typically cry when they make this prayer, that would be permitted to pray also on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So that's one possible distinction. And meaning to say, it depends how, even though we're not supposed to make personal requests on Shabbos, depends the nature of the request. If the request is not going to be so filled with emotional angst that's going to cause us to cry and thereby ruin the mood of the Shabbos, that's what some will permit. And indeed, he cites the Lavush. Lavush is 16th century Ashkenazic Rabbi Mordechai Yaffe. He writes that there's a distinction between what's called a bakasha and a techina, a request and a beseeching. So he says a request would be permitted, but a beseeching, which really comes to this true emotional turmoil, that would be prohibited. And there's also a difference. And so he writes that the distinction is as follows. That with a techina, a person is basically reviewing all the afflictions that they're undergoing, and so therefore it's like overwhelming him. But with a request, he's requesting that God should watch him and protect him and just give to him what his soul desires, without necessarily reviewing all the afflictions that they're going over. So therefore, that's the distinction. Okay. So that's the distinction, and okay, let me just pause there if everybody sees this. Any questions? Okay, so that's the first concept, the first midrash that Rav Stern cites about Zachor Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho. Second one is hold on one second. Okay, the second midrash he cites is Zachar Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. When it comes to remembering the Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira taught, Minayin k'shata moneh have Minayin k'shata moneh have a mona echa b'Shabbos, v'sheni b'Shabbos, shlishi b'Shabbos, revi'ah b'Shabbos, chamishi b'Shabbos, ve'erev Shabbos. Tamalomar zachor. So what does it mean to remember the Shabbos? So the Gemara says, this teaches us that when you count the days of the week, you should say, what's today's day? What's today? What's today? What day of the week is today? Anybody want to type in? Tell us, remind us what day of the week it is?
Yom Arba.
Yeah, today is the fourth day of the week. Revi b'Shabbos. So when you say today is so then if somebody says what's today and you say, oh, today is the Revi b'Shabbos, the fourth day of Shabbos, all of a sudden you're fulfilling the commandment of remembering the Shabbos. That every day we shouldn't just say today is Wednesday or today is Thursday or Tuesday. No, we should use the day as a way of reminding us of the Shabbos. And so therefore, that's the midrash. And Rav Sturm points out a teaching of Maimonides here about a basic distinction between the Jews and the other nations of the world. That Rambam writes, and I don't know if the Rambam is correct here, and if I'm wrong, if Rambam is wrong, somebody will tell us. But the Rambam writes that the nations of the world, they count the days of the week as independent units. Like there's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but they're not necessarily connected. But the Jewish people count every single day taking us towards the Shabbos. And so therefore everything is connected towards a common goal. And that goal is the Shabbos. And so the whole week is taking us towards the Shabbos. Okay, the next midrash that he cites is remember the Shabbos to keep it holy. And this is something which Rashi cited. What does it mean, remember the Shabbos? That if you find the good portion, you have to save this portion and keep it for the Shabbos. I just want to point out that my daughter texted me, one of my daughters, and she said, can you share with me a Dvar Torah about science and Shabbos? So she just texted me while I was thinking. And I was thinking, this is a Dvar Torah about science and Shabbos, because there's something that's impossible, which is that Zachar and Shamar could be said at the exact same moment. Scientifically, it's impossible for a person to say something at the exact same moment. But God did it. God did it. But what more than that, can you imagine for how many years, maybe 2,000 years, people were reading this midrash, this Gemara, and saying, look, the rabbis, they have their fanciful ideas. They're imagining a world where a person could say something, two exact things at the same time. But now we know it's so possible. You could just record yourself and play both things at the exact same time, and we can know exactly what it sounds like. So everything that's in the midrash and rabbinic ideas are all coming true today. Okay. Anyway, Zachor is Yom HaShabbos L'Kacho. Everybody should remember the Shabbos and keep it holy. Tehei Zochro Me'echad B'Shabbos. So what does this mean? Gemara in Beitza tells us that they said about Shammai the elder that all of his days, Kol Yama. So this is a fundamental dispute between Shammai and Hillel. Let me just pause for a moment and I'll ask the question to you. Let's say you're walking along the street and you find you pass a tremendous fish store and you see they're selling the most geschmack looking salmon in the world. And you eat fish and you like salmon and you come home and you buy this beautiful piece of salmon and it's Thursday. Should you eat it that night or should you save it for Shabbos? What should you do? Let me pause and see what people say about this exact question. Says Rav Stern, the Gemara in Beitza says about Shammai the elder, that all of his days he was eating for Shabbos. Let's say he found a nice piece of steak, he would say, this will be for Shabbos. The next day, if he found a better one, he would say, okay, I found something better. I'll replace the one I had, and now I'll eat this one for Shabbos, and then I'll eat the first one. Whereas Beis Hillel said, no, you could eat it. You could eat it if you find a nice steak, because for sure you'll find the better one before Shabbos. But what does it mean? What does it mean that he would eat it for the honor of Shabbos? He didn't eat anything that was better than it. So what does it mean he would eat it? So Rashi says he would eat the first one, so that he's saying, I'm eating this first one now so that the better one is for Shabbos. That's what Shammai was doing. So that means to say he had the intent when he ate. So meaning to say that Shammai would eat the foods also during the week that would cause him, that he knows that if he ate it on Shabbos, it would be distressful on Shabbos. Sometimes he ate other things. But this basically leads us to a fundamental dispute between Shammai and Hillel. Should we imagine that, do we have to do everything when we find it during the week, assuming that save it for Shabbos, or do we imagine that we'll always get something better for Shabbos? But both of them are in agreement that whatever is the best should be done on Shabbos. So therefore, the person in Shabbos should always wear their best clothes. You should always have a garment for Shabbos. You should always have special food for Shabbos, foods that you only eat on Shabbos, for example. Okay, everybody who ever has challah knows that challah is only good on Shabbos. You eat a challah on Sunday, it's not good. You eat a challah on Thursday, it's not good. Challah has to be eaten on Shabbos. Cholent can only be eaten on Shabbos. You should have special shoes just for Shabbos. This is the idea of both Shammai and Hillel are in agreement with. Yes, I don't know if Morris was raising his hand. Okay, Morris, please tell us what you're going to bring right along to the next midrash that Rav Stern cites. It's a beautiful midrash, and we had somebody who's becoming more connected to Shabbos, and he said all of a sudden last week when it became sunset, he said, "Why isn't the Shabbos over?" You had to explain to him Shabbos. What does it say? It says Zachar v'Shamar, Zachar milafana v'Shamar l'achra. Remember beforehand and guard it afterwards. Mikan amru mosifin michol al kodesh. That the Shabbos is not just the 24-hour period from the beginning of nightfall till nightfall. You have to add on to it. You have to add on at the beginning of Shabbos, and you have to add on at the end of Shabbos. This is the idea of Tosefes Shabbos, that there's an obligation to add on to the Shabbos. Because if you don't, what's the concept here? There's two concepts here. First of all, we're concerned that if you don't add on to the Shabbos, you might violate the Shabbos accidentally, because your clock might be off, you might be off. So this way, this is offense. But it's more than that. It's more than that. It's a recognition that we want the Shabbos to last longer. We want the Shabbos to last longer. We don't want the Shabbos to just be 24 hours. Now especially ever since October 7th, but really even before, I'm always afraid after the Shabbos to turn on my phone. I'm afraid to re-enter into the world. On Shabbos, it's like we're in a cocoon, that we have shut ourselves off from the bad news that's being shot at us day and night, from the news cycle, from the world, from the viciousness that goes on in the world. And when we're observing the Shabbos, we get to be immune from that. So we want to add on to that moment. So therefore, there's a special mitzvah to add on to the Shabbos before the Shabbos and after the Shabbos. That's why we light the Shabbos candle while it's still broad daylight, and we end the Shabbos when it's very dark at night. Okay, the next midrash that Rav Stern cites, Zachor v'Shamor. Okay, this is a beautiful one. They're all beautiful. Everything he says is beautiful, but there's another beautiful one. He says, Amar Rebbe Ibo, Zachor nasen l'yordei hayam. To remember was given to those who go into the sea. Meaning to say, remember was given to those who are on the sea. They don't realize if when they're carrying in a prohibited manner or permitted manner. Shamor, guard it, nitan liyoshvei ayabasha. Guard it was given to those who are dwelling on the dry land. Meaning to say, what does this mean? Listen to what Rav Stern says. What does this mean? That this refers to the people who are on the sea. And he quotes here the Smag. Smag was written by Rabbi Moses of Kusi of Provence in the 13th century. And he writes that in the sea, there's no shade from the houses and the trees. And it looks like it's still daytime, even though it's about to be dark. So you don't realize it's Shabbos. And so they are not 100% sure whether or not they're allowed to be violating this, doing the prohibited activities because they don't know if it's Shabbos. And in the dry land in the city, even though it is really completely during the day, they're going to think, oh, there's the shadows coming in because it's from the houses, and they'll think that it's nightfall. And so therefore it says, remember it on the sea, meaning to say that you should be extra careful on the sea. And those are in the Shabbos, meaning in the city, in the dry land, they're guarding it because they're extra careful because they're in the dry land. And that's the way you understand this. Meaning to say, and the way I take this is, for some people, it's easier to keep the Shabbos than others, and they have to be extra vigilant. And for other people, it's much harder to keep the Shabbos, and they also need the extra help from Hashem, the siyata d'shmaya, the support from heaven to help them keep the Shabbos during that difficult time. That's the idea there. The next midrash that he cites is the Gemara from Brachos 20b. What does it mean? Remember and guard the Shabbos. It says this is women's participation in the Shabbos. By the way, the Shabbos is one of the mitzvahs that women are given, specifically the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. Zachar v'shamor. Amar Rav Ada bar Ava. Women are obligated to recite Kiddush on Shabbos, biblically speaking. There's a biblical obligation for the women to sanctify the Shabbos. Women have to say Kiddush on Shabbos. Why? Isn't it a time-bound positive commandment? Meaning to say you sanctify the Shabbos on Friday night. That's bound by time. Excuse me. And it's a positive commandment. So why are women obligated in it? Any time-bound positive commandment, women are exempt from. So Abaye says it's rabbinic. Abaye says the women's obligation to recite the Shabbos is just rabbinic. But Rava says, no, we just said that it's biblical. So you can't say that it's rabbinic. And furthermore, why would we say that they're rabbinically obligated? Specifically in this, they're rabbinically obligated in every mitzvah. So therefore, Rava says it's based upon the commandment, remember and guard the Shabbos, which were said at the same time. And anybody who is commanded to guard the Shabbos is commanded to remember it. And so therefore, women, since they're commanded to guard the Shabbos, they're commanded to remember the Shabbos. So therefore, for this reason, we say that women have all of these obligations on Shabbos, just like a man does. And so what are some of the examples? They have to make sure that they either recite the Kiddush themselves or hear the Kiddush that's recited. A woman also is obligated in Havdalah to recite the prayer at the end of Shabbos over the fire and the cup, to make a cup of wine, to make sure that they distinguish between the beginning of Shabbos and the end of Shabbos. A third category, which Rav Stern lists, is that, of course, the woman is obligated in the candles of Shabbos. And this doesn't just mean the obligation to light the candles, but this means to make sure that the candles are filling up the home, that they're adding brightness to the home, and that the house is illuminated and with the delight of the Shabbos. So that's another area. A fourth example is a woman is specifically obligated to give the greeting of Shabbos, that it's brought down in the commentaries, that if you see somebody on Shabbos, you shouldn't just say, hey, how are you doing? There's a special aspect, a special blessing of saying Shabbat Shalom, the Shlah. By Isaiah Levi Horowitz writes, he says, a person who visits his friend on Shabbos should not say to him, have a good day, but he should only say Shabbat Shalom or Shabbos Tov, good Shabbos, to fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor Yom Shabbos L'Kacha. This is a commandment of both men and women. So every time you say Shabbat Shalom or good Shabbos, you're fulfilling the biblical obligation of remembering the Shabbos and sanctifying the Shabbos. Fifth area, that a woman is also obligated to eat the special food of Shabbos. Now, in the time where they wrote this, they didn't really have vegetarians or vegans, so everything they talked about was eating meat and fish and drinking wine. But it really means a person should eat their favorite foods on the Shabbos, and this is the obligation for both men and women. And so, therefore, even though there's some say, and he brings down that you should eat specifically meat and fish on Shabbos, because that corresponds to in the time of the Messianic era, or the resurrection of the dead, that God is going to serve a feast to the tzaddikim of the Leviathan and the Shor Habar, the special mythical ox. And so therefore, these are special foods that we should eat corresponding to that, reminding us of that time that's coming. And then there's also idea, Rav Stern brings down this idea of eating an egg and onion on Shabbos. Now, he's going to find a source for it, but really, probably it was because, like Morris said, that they were too cheap. That's all they could afford. They were too poor. So they used to have egg salad, eggs and onions. But he brings it down that this was something specific, because, and he brings it down, an egg has a shell and an onion has a shell. And so therefore, it's something that would have to be eaten fresh. And so therefore, they would peel it on Shabbos, and they would eat it on Shabbos in that manner. So these are all the ways. Yes. Somebody trying to say something? Okay. So these are all the ways that that the women also would fulfill the Shabbos. And now we quote the next midrash, which is from the Mechilta. It says, you need to sanctify the Shabbos and make it holy. How do you make the Shabbos holy? With food and drink, with clean clothes, so that your meals on Shabbos should not be like the meals of the week. Your dress on Shabbos should not be like the dress during the week. And how do we know even a poor person his food on Shabbos cannot be like during the week? And even a wealthy man, his food on Shabbos should not be like the food during the week. Says the verse, Zachor Yom Shabbos L'Kacho. Okay, now we're up to the next one. The next commandment is 6 days you shall work and you shall do all your work. So this is what Rashi said, that you have to even not even think about your thoughts of your work on Shabbos. So the Rav Stern cites the midrash, Shavos mi machshavas avoda. Refrain from even thinking about your work. So there was a story in the Gemara in Shabbos about a pious man, that there was a breach in his fence on Shabbos. And they were just telling him, you have to fence up your so basically what happened was he had a breach in his fence on Shabbos. And when he saw the breach, he started thinking about it. Oh, you know what I need to do? I need to build a fence here after Shabbos. All that happened was he thought, oh, okay, I see that there's a hole in my fence. I need to fill this up after Shabbos. But after Shabbos, he said, well, since I had this thought on Shabbos, I'm never going to fence up my fence. You follow the story? He said, I thought about it on Shabbos, so now I'll never do it. How did God pay him back? There was a tree there that was growing, basically growing there, and it spread out and it filled in the fence, and he was able to be nourished from that tree his whole life. So we see some absolute piety here. It's not the law, but the piety was something that he thought about, which he shouldn't have been thinking about it, he accepted a stringency and God repaid him. There's also another story it brings down that who was this pious man? This is what Rav Stern brings down. Who was this pious man who had this thought? It says this pious man was the Gilgal, the resurrected, the basically, what's a Gilgal? I'm gonna say now, even though I don't want to go into it too much, that we have this reincarnation, the soul's coming back in a different form. So this was the reincarnated soul of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad was the one in the Torah who desecrated the Shabbos, and he came back to life as this pious man. And so therefore, the type of tree was this like berry tree, which has the name Tzlafchad. And so therefore, others say that it was Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai, and that some say it was Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai because in the Gematria is the same number and numerical value as Tzlafchad ben Chayfer. So that's something you could bring up at your Shabbos table, tell the people the story of this pious man Tzlafchad. A very beautiful idea from Rav Stern. Okay, we'll stop the recording here. If anybody has any questions, happy to address.